New Haven was the kind of place that nobody remembered and nobody cared about. It sat on the edge of human space like a forgotten coin that had rolled under the furniture. The colony had 8,000 people who lived simple lives growing food and mining rocks. The planet was not beautiful and it was not rich. The air was thin and the soil was poor. Every crop needed chemicals and every breath needed filters. But it was home for the people who lived there, and that was enough. Captain Jake Morrison walked through the command center with a coffee cup in his hand and boredom in his eyes. He was 34 years old and he had been running this colony for 3 years. 3 long years where nothing ever happened. No attacks and no emergencies and no excitement. Just broken equipment and supply problems and reports that nobody would ever read. He had joined the colonial service because he wanted adventure. He had ended up on New Haven because the universe had a sense of humor. The command center was small and old. The computers were outdated and the screens flickered when the power fluctuated. There were 5 people working in the room and they all looked as bored as Jake felt. Lisa Chen sat at the engineering station and she was reviewing another list of broken equipment. She was 46 years old and she had gray hair that she kept in a practical bun. She had spent 20 years working on important colonies before retiring to New Haven. She had wanted peace and quiet. She had gotten both in overwhelming amounts. Danny Cooper was the youngest person in the room at 26 years old. He was a lieutenant in the Colonial Defense Force and he commanded all 12 soldiers stationed on New Haven. 12 soldiers with old rifles and outdated armor. They spent most of their time helping farmers fix tractors and teaching kids about gun safety. Danny had never fired his weapon at anything except targets. He told himself that was a good thing, but part of him wondered if he would know what to do if something real ever happened. Sam Price ran communications and he was reading a novel on his screen instead of watching the sensor displays. Nobody blamed him. The sensors had not detected anything interesting in 6 months. Beth Walker was reviewing the school budget because she was the principal and also the colony education director. She did her real job in the mornings and helped in the command center in the afternoons. That was how things worked on New Haven. Everyone did 3 jobs because there were not enough people to do 1 job each. Jake finished his coffee and looked at the main display. It showed the whole system in a simple map. New Haven was the only inhabited planet. There was 1 moon and 2 asteroid belts and a lot of empty space. The display also showed their defensive satellite, which was currently offline for the 3rd time this week. The satellite was supposed to watch for ships and send warnings. Instead, it watched nothing and sent error messages. Lisa looked up from her screen and frowned. She had that expression that meant something else had broken. Jake knew that expression well. He saw it every day. Another water recycler is dead in Sector 7, she said. That makes 3 this month. Jake sighed and put his empty cup down. What is it this time? Same as always. Mineral buildup from the mining runoff. The water is full of thorium and other heavy elements. It clogs everything. Can you fix it? I can fix anything given enough time and parts. But we do not have enough parts and we do not have enough time. We need to purge the whole system, but that costs money we do not have. This was the reality of New Haven. Everything was breaking and nothing could be properly fixed. They patched and improvised and hoped things would last another month. The colonial administration sent them a budget that was barely enough to keep people alive. Defense and maintenance and improvements were luxuries that colonies like New Haven could not afford. Jake added the water recycler to his mental list of problems. It went right below the atmospheric processors that needed replacing and above the school heating system that only worked on warm days. He would send another request to the administration and they would deny it and life would continue. How much contaminated water are we talking about? He asked. Lisa checked her notes. The main reservoir has about 40,000 liters of water that is too contaminated to process. We have been collecting it for months because we cannot afford to waste it. But we also cannot clean it with our current equipment, so it just sits there getting more radioactive. Wonderful. Colony life is glamorous, Lisa said with a dry smile. The morning continued in its usual pattern of small problems and smaller solutions. A farmer called about a broken irrigation system. A teacher requested new tablets for her students. The medical clinic needed more supplies. Jake handled each problem with practiced efficiency. This was his life now. He had imagined being a colony administrator would involve important decisions and meaningful work. Instead, it involved being a professional problem solver for issues that nobody else cared about. At noon, Jake ate lunch in the cafeteria with some of the farmers. They talked about weather and crop yields and the upcoming festival. Life on New Haven was simple and predictable. People worked hard and helped each other and found happiness in small things. There were no luxuries, but there was community. There was no excitement, but there was peace. For most people, that was more than enough. Jake returned to the command center at 1 o'clock and found everything exactly as he had left it. Sam was still reading his novel. Beth was still working on budgets. Lisa was still fixing broken equipment from her computer. Danny had left to run training exercises with his soldiers. The defensive satellite was still offline. The universe continued to ignore New Haven completely. Jake sat down at his desk and started working on supply requisitions. They needed food supplements and machine parts and medical supplies. He would submit the requests and wait 6 weeks for approval and receive half of what he asked for. Then he would figure out how to make it work anyway. That was the job. He did not know that in 6 hours everything would change. He did not know that New Haven was about to become the most important colony in human space. He did not know that his boring little command center would soon be filled with alarms and panic and desperate decisions. He did not know that he would have to turn his entire colony into a weapon just to survive. Right now, he only knew that the coffee was cold and the reports were boring and nothing ever happened on New Haven. He was wrong about that last part, but he would not find out until it was almost too late. The alarm hit the command center like a physical blow. It was loud and sharp and wrong. Everyone jumped at the same time. Jake spilled his coffee across his desk and Sam dropped his tablet. Lisa spun in her chair so fast she nearly fell. The screens went from showing nothing to showing everything at once. Red lights flashed. Numbers scrolled. Warning messages appeared faster than anyone could read them. Jake lunged for the main display and his hands were shaking. His heart hammered in his chest. In 3 years, he had never heard this alarm. He had started to believe he never would. "What is happening?" Lisa shouted over the noise. Jake stared at the screen and his mouth went dry. There were contacts. Multiple contacts. Ships dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. He counted fast. 6 ships. No, wait, 8, no, 9 ships total. 9 contacts, he said, and his voice cracked. Coming in fast. Sam had recovered his tablet and was working frantically, running identification protocols now. Jake watched the ships on his display. They were big, much bigger than cargo vessels or passenger transports. These were warships. His stomach twisted into a knot. There were no friendly military exercises scheduled. There were no supply convoys coming. These ships were not supposed to be here. Identification complete, Sam said, and his face had gone white. Krydak signatures confirmed. 9 Krydak warships. The room went silent except for the alarms. Everyone knew what Krydak meant. The insectoid raiders had been attacking human colonies for 5 years. They hit fast and hard. They took supplies and destroyed infrastructure and killed anyone who resisted. Then they vanished before help could arrive. But they usually only sent 2 or 3 ships to hit small targets. 9 ships was not a raid. 9 ships was an invasion. Send distress signal immediately, Jake ordered. Priority Alpha. Get me Lieutenant Cooper. Activate colony evacuation protocols. Beth was already moving. I will get the civilians to the bunkers. How long until they reach us, Lisa asked. Sam checked his calculations. At current speed, they will be in orbit in 38 minutes. What about the nearest patrol? Sam looked at Jake with hollow eyes. 6 hours away, 6 hours. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. In 6 hours, New Haven would be a smoking crater. The Krydak would destroy the power plants and the water facilities and the communications arrays. They would bomb the residential areas. They would kill thousands of people, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop them. Danny burst through the door. His uniform was half-buttoned and his hair was messy. He had clearly been running. Sir, what do you need? We have 9 Krydak warships inbound, Jake said. 38 minutes, Danny went pale. 9. Sir, we have 12 soldiers and rifles. We cannot fight warships. I know. What are our orders? Jake looked at the display again. 9 ships. 8,000 people. 38 minutes. His mind raced through options. They could not fight. New Haven had no weapons that could touch ships in orbit. They could not run. There were not enough transport ships to evacuate even half the population. They could not hide. The Krydak had sensors that would find every bunker. They were going to die. All of them. Unless Jake could think of something impossible. His eyes moved across the displays. Resources, assets, capabilities. New Haven had almost nothing. Old equipment, broken systems, a handful of soldiers. But there had to be something. Anything. He saw Lisa's maintenance report still open on her screen. Water recyclers, contaminated runoff, mineral buildup, and idea formed. It was insane. It would probably not work, but it was better than nothing. Lisa, how much contaminated water do we have in the main reservoir? She blinked at him. What? The thorium-contaminated water you mentioned. How much? I told you. About 40,000 liters. But Jake, what does that have to do with anything? How radioactive is it? Very. It has thorium-232 and other heavy isotopes. We cannot process it safely with our equipment. Why? Jake turned to Danny. I need you to gather every vehicle with emergency thrusters, mining haulers, cargo transports, construction equipment, atmospheric shuttles, everything. Sir, I do not understand. We are going to make bombs. Lisa stood up. You want to weaponize the contaminated water? Yes, that is insane. Do you have a better idea? Nobody spoke. The alarms continued to wail. The Krydak ships continued to approach. 35 minutes remained. Lisa took a deep breath. It might work. The mining haulers have emergency launch thrusters designed to reach orbit. If we load them with contaminated water and rig them to explode, the Krydak point defense will shoot them down, Danny said. Not if they think it is garbage, Jake replied. What does contaminated water look like on sensors? Lisa pulled up her analysis programs. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. Thorium-232 and water suspension. High radioactive signature. It would look similar to spent fusion plasma, like waste products being ejected. So the Krydak will see garbage being dumped from a panicking colony, until it explodes in their faces. Jake looked around the room. Everyone was staring at him. Beth had returned from activating the evacuation. Sam had sent the distress signal. Danny stood ready for orders. Lisa had her hands on her keyboard waiting. This is completely crazy, Lisa said. Yes. It will probably not work. Probably. We could all die anyway. We will definitely die if we do nothing, Lisa smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who had nothing left to lose. Then let us build some bombs. Jake activated the colony-wide communications. His voice went out to every speaker and every screen and every radio. 8,000 people heard him speak. This is Captain Morrison. We have hostile ships approaching. We are evacuating all civilians to emergency shelters immediately. This is not a drill. Move quickly and stay calm. We have a plan and we are going to survive this, trust me. Morrison out. He hoped he sounded more confident than he felt. Danny was already on his radio. All military personnel report to the vehicle depot. Emergency priority. Move now. Lisa opened her engineering channels. All mechanics and technicians report for immediate duty. We have 30 minutes to rig launch systems on every heavy vehicle. Start with the mining haulers. Beth coordinated the civilian evacuation. Families poured into the streets heading for the reinforced bunkers under the residential districts. Parents carried children. Neighbors helped elderly residents. Everyone moved with purpose but without panic. These were frontier people. They knew how to handle emergencies. In the vehicle depot, workers swarmed over the mining haulers. These were massive machines designed to break rocks and haul ore. Each one weighed 50 tons and had reinforced armor. Each one had emergency thrusters that could blast them away from danger. Those thrusters had enough power to reach low orbit. Nobody had ever thought to use them as missiles. Engineers welded storage tanks onto the hauler frames. Technicians ran power lines and rigged detonators. Mechanics programmed the guidance computers. Farmers who had driven these machines for years now loaded them with thousands of liters of radioactive sludge. Jake watched from the depot control room. 30 vehicles were ready, 40, 50. The numbers climbed. Every person on New Haven was working. Everyone knew what was at stake. 20 minutes remained. The Krydak fleet was accelerating. They would be in weapons range soon. Then it would be over. The vehicle depot had become a battlefield of organized chaos. 63 heavy machines sat in rows and each one was being transformed into a weapon. Welding torches threw sparks across the concrete floor. Power tools screamed. People shouted instructions over the noise. Everyone moved with desperate speed because time was running out. Jake stood on the catwalk overlooking the work. 15 minutes remained before the Krydak entered orbit. 15 minutes to finish preparing. 15 minutes before they would find out if this insane plan would work, or if they had just wasted their last moments on Earth doing something pointless. Lisa climbed the stairs to join him. Her face was streaked with grease and her hands were shaking. 58 vehicles are ready. The last 5 will be done in 8 minutes. Guidance systems, programmed. Each one will launch on a slightly different trajectory to spread the coverage area. The detonators are rigged to blow when they reach optimal altitude, and the Krydak sensors will read it as waste disposal. That is the theory. Thorium-232 in water suspension creates almost the same signature as spent fusion plasma. From orbit, it should look like a colony dumping contaminated coolant or reactor waste. Should. Lisa met his eyes. Jake, there is no guarantee this will work. We are guessing about their sensor capabilities. We are guessing about their response protocols. We are throwing radioactive mud at warships and hoping they choke on it. I know. A lot of people are going to die if we are wrong. A lot of people will die if we do nothing. At least this way we tried. Down on the depot floor, Danny was coordinating the final preparations. His 12 soldiers worked alongside farmers and mechanics and teachers. A woman who grew corn was programming targeting computers. A man who taught math was rigging detonation circuits. A teenager who worked in the cafeteria was loading contaminated water into storage tanks. This was what humanity looked like when survival was the only option. Everyone became a soldier. Everyone contributed. Social roles and job titles stopped mattering. There was only the work and the hope that it would be enough. One of the mining haulers rumbled to life. Its emergency thrusters fired in a test sequence, and the whole machine lifted 3 feet off the ground before settling back down. The thrusters were designed for emergency escapes from cave collapses. They could push 50 tons of metal straight up at high speed. They had never been designed to reach orbit, but the engineers had modified the fuel loads and adjusted the burn sequences. It would work, probably. Sam's voice crackled over Jake's radio. Captain, the Krydak fleet is entering high orbit. 12 minutes to weapons range. Acknowledged. Are all civilians in the shelters? Beth confirms everyone is secure. The bunkers are sealed. 8,000 people were now huddled underground in reinforced shelters that were designed to survive meteor strikes. The shelters had air and water and supplies for 3 days. They would protect against bombs and radiation. They would not protect against a sustained orbital bombardment. Nothing would protect against that. Jake switched channels. Danny, what is the count? 61 vehicles ready. Last 2 finishing now. Launch positions. All haulers are in the firing grid. We can begin launch sequence on your command. Jake looked at Lisa. She nodded. There was nothing more they could do. Either the plan would work or it would not. Either New Haven would survive or it would burn. Prepare for launch sequence, Jake ordered. All non-essential personnel evacuate the depot and get to the shelters. The workers began to clear out. They ran for the exits and disappeared into the tunnels leading to the bunkers. Soon only the command crew remained. Jake and Lisa and Danny and Sam and Beth. 5 people who would either save their colony or die trying. Krydak fleet is moving into attack formation, Sam reported. 10 minutes to weapons range. They are charging their main guns. Jake pulled up the tactical display. 9 Krydak ships spread across high orbit. Each one was 3 times the size of anything humanity had in this sector. Each one carried enough firepower to level a city. Against them, New Haven had 63 mining haulers filled with radioactive sludge. It was the most ridiculous military strategy in human history. All vehicles report ready, Danny said. Launch systems are armed. Guidance is locked. Fuel cells are at maximum. We can fire on your order. Jake took a deep breath. This was it, the moment that would define everything. He thought about the 8,000 people in the bunkers. He thought about the families and the children and the future that would end if he made the wrong call. He thought about doing nothing and watching from the ground as the Krydak destroyed everything. Launch sequence authorized, he said. Fire all vehicles. The depot exploded with sound and light. 63 emergency thrusters ignited simultaneously. The concrete floor cracked from the force. Metal groaned. The air filled with heat and smoke, and the roar of engines pushed far beyond their design limits. The first mining hauler shot upward like a meteor in reverse. Then the second. Then the third. Within 30 seconds, all 63 vehicles were climbing toward space on pillars of fire. They rose through the thin atmosphere, leaving trails of exhaust and scattered debris. The ground shook. Windows shattered in nearby buildings. The noise was incredible. Jake watched the display as 63 dots climbed toward the 9 larger dots representing the Krydak fleet. Everything depended on the next few minutes. If the Krydak identified the haulers as weapons, they would shoot them down easily. If the haulers exploded too early, they would be ineffective. If they exploded too late, they would miss the fleet entirely. Krydak fleet is scanning the launches, Sam said. They are. Wait, they are ignoring them. Their point defense systems are staying offline. They think it is garbage, Lisa whispered. The Krydak tactical officer designated Sensor Cluster 9 observed the human colony's panic with professional detachment. The inferior species was dumping waste products into space as their world prepared to die. It was a common reaction. Biological creatures often did irrational things when facing extinction. Ignore the debris, his commander clicked. Focus all targeting on the power generation facilities. We will destroy their ability to resist before landing ground forces. The Krydak weapons charged. Massive energy cannons capable of burning through reinforced steel prepared to fire. The fleet moved into optimal firing positions. In 3 minutes, they would begin the bombardment. In 30 minutes, New Haven would be a dead world ready for harvesting. On the ground, Jake watched his makeshift missiles climb higher. 63 vehicles reached the edge of space and spread out in a pattern that Lisa had calculated to maximize coverage. Each one was now a crude bomb carrying thousands of liters of water contaminated with thorium and uranium, and a dozen other radioactive elements. Altitude achieved, Lisa reported. Detonation in 10 seconds, Jake counted, silently. 10, 9, 8. The Krydak fleet hung in orbit completely, unaware. 765, their weapons continued charging. 4, 3, 2, they prepared to fire. 1, detonate. 60. 3 mining haulers exploded at the same moment. The result was not elegant or sophisticated. It was brutal and messy and effective. Thousands of liters of contaminated water burst outward in massive spheres of liquid and particulate matter. The droplets dispersed into clouds of radioactive debris that spread across orbit like a toxic fog. The Krydak fleet flew directly into the contamination field. Immediately, alarms sounded on every Krydak ship. External sensors went dark as radioactive particles clogged intake ports and fouled detection arrays. Navigation systems lost accuracy as the debris interfered with their calculations. Weapons targeting failed as the fire control computers received corrupted data from the contaminated sensors. The Krydak commander stared at his displays in confusion. Everything had been clear and functional. Now everything was chaos and errors. His ship was flying blind through some kind of hazardous cloud. Report, he clicked urgently. External contamination detected across all ships. Unknown radioactive substance. Sensors are failing. Weapons cannot achieve lock. Navigation is compromised, and how did this happen? The debris from the surface. It was not waste. It was a weapon. The Krydak commander felt something he rarely experienced. Fear. The Krydak fleet was dying, not from weapons fire or missiles or torpedoes. It was dying from contaminated water and radioactive mud. The 9 warships that had come to conquer New Haven were now blind and choking on industrial waste. Jake watched his display as the Krydak formation fell apart. The ships were breaking away from each other. Their movements were jerky and uncontrolled. 2 of them collided at low speed and bounced off each other, spinning. A third was venting atmosphere from a damaged port that had been clogged with debris and then ruptured from pressure buildup. They cannot see, Lisa said with wonder in her voice. The contamination is everywhere. Every sensor they have is reading garbage data. Sam was monitoring their communications channels. The Krydak used tight beam transmissions that were hard to intercept, but some signals were leaking through. They are panicking. I am picking up multiple emergency broadcasts. Something about reactor cooling systems failing. The particulate matter got into their intake systems, Lisa explained. These ships are designed for clean space operations. They have filters, but nothing that can handle this level of contamination. The radioactive particles are getting into everything. Danny had joined them in the command center. His face was flushed with excitement. Are we winning? We might be, Jake said carefully. He did not want to celebrate too early. The Krydak were dangerous, and desperate enemies were the most dangerous kind. Sam, keep monitoring their communications. Lisa, watch for any signs they are clearing their systems. The Krydak commander, whose name was Tactical Nest 7, struggled to maintain control of his bridge. Alarms wailed from every station. His crew was clicking frantically trying to restore basic functions. The ship was flying through a cloud of toxic waste that was destroying everything it touched. Engineering reports reactor cooling is compromised. His second officer reported. Contamination in the primary coolant lines. Weapons status, offline. Fire control cannot achieve target lock without functional sensors. Navigation, degraded. We can maneuver, but precision jumps to hyperspace are not possible without clean sensor data. Tactical Nest 7 understood the situation immediately. They could not fight. They could not accurately navigate. They could not even see the enemy clearly. The humans had turned their own weakness into a weapon, and now the Krydak fleet was trapped in a cloud of radioactive filth. Order all ships to retreat to minimum safe distance. Emergency burn on all engines. His ship shuddered as the main drives fired at maximum power. The other Krydak vessels were doing the same. They were running. The mighty Krydak fleet was running from a colony that did not even have proper defensive weapons. Two ships collided again as they tried to navigate blind through the debris field. This time the impact was harder. Hull plating crumpled. One ship lost attitude control and began tumbling. The other managed to pull away, but it was leaking fuel and atmosphere. A third ship suffered a catastrophic failure. Its reactor had been contaminated with radioactive particles, and the cooling system could not compensate. The reactor went into emergency shutdown to prevent a meltdown. Without power, the ship went dark. It drifted helplessly in orbit, surrounded by the toxic cloud it could not escape. 3 ships disabled, Sam reported. The other 6 are retreating, but they are struggling. Their engines are firing erratically. Jake allowed himself a small smile. Danny, how long has it been since they entered orbit? Danny checked his chronometer. 6 minutes 40 seconds. And how long until our reinforcements arrive? 5 hours 53 minutes. Then we need to make sure those 6 ships do not recover before help gets here. Lisa was already working. I can rig more haulers. We still have industrial vehicles in the secondary depot. If we load them with more contaminated water, do it, but keep some in reserve. If they try to approach again, we need to be ready. Beth had been listening quietly. What about the civilians? Can we tell them it is safe? Not yet. Keep everyone in the shelters until the Krydak are either gone or destroyed. We hurt them, but they are not finished. The Krydak fleet continued its chaotic retreat. The ships that could still maneuver moved away from the contamination field, trying to reach clean space where they could assess damage and restore systems. But the radioactive cloud was spreading. The particles were light and they drifted on solar winds and orbital mechanics. What had been a concentrated weapon was becoming a hazard zone that covered a significant portion of near-orbit space. Tactical Nest 7 finally reached clean space after 10 minutes of desperate maneuvering. His ship's sensors began to clear. Slowly systems came back online, but the damage was extensive. His weapons were still offline. His navigation was functioning but unreliable. 3 of his ships were disabled and drifting. The other 5 were damaged to varying degrees. Status of the fleet, he demanded. Ship 3 is without power. Ship 5 has lost attitude control. Ship 7 suffered hull breaches and is venting atmosphere. Ships 2, 4, 6, 8, and 9 are damaged but functional. Weapons are offline on all vessels. Sensors are compromised. Reactor efficiency is reduced by 40% across the fleet. Tactical Nest 7 felt something close to rage. His invasion force had been destroyed by farming equipment and dirty water. The humans had not used advanced weapons or military tactics. They had simply thrown garbage at him and it had worked. Can we resume the attack? Negative. Without functional weapons and sensors, we cannot conduct orbital bombardment. Attempting to approach the planet again would expose us to another contamination attack. What about landing ground forces? Our troop transports were damaged in the initial contamination. We do not have the capability to conduct a ground assault. The commander stared at his main display. The human colony sat on the planet's surface untouched and unharmed. His fleet hung in space crippled and helpless. He had come to conquer. Instead, he had been defeated by the most primitive tactics he had ever encountered. Prepare for emergency hyperspace jump. We are retreating. Sir, the other fleets will consider this a failure. The other fleets can come and fight radioactive sewage themselves. We are leaving. On New Haven, Jake watched the Krydak ships begin to orient for hyperspace transition. They were preparing to run. After only 7 minutes of combat, they were abandoning the attack and fleeing the system. They are actually leaving, Danny said in disbelief. They have no choice. We took away their ability to fight. A blind enemy with no weapons is just a target. The 6 functional Krydak ships formed up as best they could. Their hyperspace drives began charging. It would take several minutes to build enough power for the jump. During that time, they were vulnerable, but New Haven had nothing left to throw at them. The colonists had used every vehicle they could convert into a weapon. Sam suddenly sat up straight. "Captain, I'm reading new contacts. Multiple ships entering the system." Jake's heart sank. More Krydak. They were calling for reinforcements, identification. Sam grinned. "Human signatures. Colonial Defense Force, it is the cavalry. They are 3 hours early. The distress signal must have reached a closer patrol. I count 8 ships, 12 ships. It is a full battle group." The Krydak detected the new arrivals at the same moment. Their hyperspace drives charged faster. They needed to escape before the human military arrived. The 3 disabled ships were abandoned. Their crews evacuated to the functional vessels in desperate rescue operations. 8 minutes after entering orbit, the Krydak fleet jumped to hyperspace. 6 damaged ships fled into the void, leaving 3 dead hulks drifting in contaminated space. They had come to conquer a defenseless colony. They had been defeated in 7 minutes by farmers with mining equipment. The Colonial Defense Force fleet arrived 20 minutes later. The lead ship was a heavy cruiser called the Vancouver. Its captain was a woman named Helen Price who had served in the military for 30 years. She had seen combat against pirates and raiders. She had never seen anything like what she found at New Haven. "Tactical report," she ordered as her ship entered orbit. 3 disabled Krydak vessels detected. No active threats. Large contamination field in near orbit. Composition analysis shows radioactive water with high concentrations of thorium, uranium, and other heavy elements. "What is that doing in orbit?" "Unknown, Captain." "The colony is hailing us." Helen opened the channel. "This is Captain Price of the Vancouver. New Haven, please respond." Jake's voice came through clearly. "Captain, this is Jake Morrison. Welcome to New Haven. Mr. Morrison, what happened here?" "Our sensors show Krydak ships in a radioactive debris field." "That is correct." "Did you fight the Krydak?" "Yes." "With what exactly?" Jake smiled. "Contaminated mining runoff and improvised explosives." There was a long pause. "You fought warships with dirty water." "It was very dirty water." "How long did the battle last?" 7 minutes from orbital insertion to retreat." Another pause. "Mr. Morrison, I am going to need you to explain this very carefully." Captain Helen Price stood in New Haven's command center and listened to Jake Morrison explain the battle 3 times. Each time she listened, she became more convinced that she had misunderstood something fundamental. But the evidence was undeniable. The 3 disabled Krydak ships in orbit, the radioactive debris field, the mining haulers scattered across the launch site, the colony standing intact and undamaged. "You weaponized your sewage," she said finally. "Technically, it was contaminated mining runoff," Jake corrected. "You turned industrial waste into orbital mines. We turned desperation into a strategy." Helen sat down heavily in one of the command chairs. She had commanded warships for 3 decades. She had studied military tactics at the academy. She had fought in a dozen engagements. Nothing in her training had prepared her for this. "Mr. Morrison, this is the most ridiculous thing I have ever heard." "It worked. That does not make it less ridiculous." Lisa spoke up from her engineering station. "Captain, with respect, we did not have advanced weapons or trained soldiers or defensive satellites. We had broken equipment and contaminated water and 30 minutes to live. We used what we had." Helen looked at the colony's chief engineer, then at the young lieutenant who commanded 12 soldiers, then at the communications officer and the school principal. These were not warriors. They were farmers and teachers and mechanics. They had defeated a Krydak invasion fleet because they had no other choice. "The Krydak ships we captured are providing valuable intelligence," Helen admitted. "My technical team has been examining them. The level of contamination damage is extraordinary. Their systems were completely overwhelmed." "How long until they would have recovered?" Jake asked. "Our analyst estimates 6 to 8 hours for basic functionality. Days for full combat capability. You bought yourself enough time for rescue." "We bought ourselves survival." Helen nodded slowly. "Yes, you did. I have already sent my report to Fleet Command. This engagement will be studied for years. You have changed how we think about defensive strategies." Danny looked surprised. "We have." Lieutenant Yu demonstrated that conventional superiority means nothing if the enemy cannot function in the combat environment. The Krydak had better ships and better weapons, but you controlled the battlefield. That is the essence of tactics. Over the next week, New Haven became the most famous colony in human space. News services broadcast the story constantly. Military analysts appeared on shows to discuss the implications. Politicians gave speeches about human ingenuity and frontier spirit. The colony that nobody remembered suddenly became the colony that everyone wanted to visit. Jake found himself giving interviews to reporters from Earth and Mars and a dozen core worlds. They all asked the same questions. How did you think of it? Were you scared? What was going through your mind? He answered patiently but honestly. Yes, he was terrified. No, he did not feel like a hero. He had simply done what needed to be done with the resources available. The colonial administration suddenly discovered that New Haven existed. Supply ships arrived with new equipment. Engineers came to upgrade the systems. The broken water recyclers were replaced. The atmospheric processors were modernized. The defensive satellite was scrapped and a proper military sensor network was installed. Most importantly, the colony received actual defensive weapons. Orbital defense platforms, surface-to-space missiles, proper military personnel to operate them. New Haven would never be defenseless again. But the colonists insisted on one addition that puzzled the military engineers. They wanted a monument in the town square. Not a statue of a general or a memorial to fallen soldiers. They wanted to preserve one of the mining haulers exactly as it had been on that desperate day. The hauler was cleaned and restored and placed on a concrete platform in the center of town. A simple plaque was installed at the base. The words were chosen carefully by Beth Walker after consulting with the entire community. The plaque read, "On this day, the weakest colony in human space proved that strength is not measured in weapons or numbers, but in the courage to fight with whatever you have." Jake stood before the monument on Dedication Day and addressed the gathered crowd. 8,000 colonists who had survived because they refused to give up. Families who had huddled in bunkers not knowing if they would see another sunrise. Children who had learned that safety was never guaranteed and that sometimes ordinary people had to do extraordinary things. "We did not ask to be heroes," Jake said. "We did not want to fight. We wanted to grow our crops and raise our families and live quiet lives. But when that choice was taken from us, we fought back with everything we had. That is not heroism. That is simply being human." The crowd applauded. Helen Price was there in her dress uniform representing the Colonial Defense Force. She had brought a gift from Fleet Command, a formal commendation for the entire colony. It was the first time in history that an entire civilian population had received military honors. Danny Cooper received a promotion to captain in command of New Haven's new military garrison. Lisa Chen became the sector chief engineer overseeing defensive installations on 6 colonies. Sam Price was offered a position with military intelligence. Beth Walker remained the school principal because she said someone needed to teach the children that violence should always be the last option. Jake Morrison was offered a dozen positions on important colonies and core worlds. Administrators wanted him. Military commanders wanted him. Politicians wanted to associate with the man who had defeated the Krydak with dirty water. He declined every offer. New Haven was his home and he intended to stay. The story spread beyond human space. Other species heard about the battle and reacted with disbelief. The Krydak Collective issued an official statement declaring New Haven a Category 5 hazard zone. All Krydak vessels were ordered to avoid the system entirely. The idea that humans would deliberately weaponize toxic waste was so alien to their thinking that they simply could not calculate appropriate tactical responses. Other species took note. If humanity would turn anything into a weapon when threatened, then conventional military assessments were meaningless. A weak human colony was not necessarily an easy target. It might be a trap waiting to be sprung. The galactic community began to view humanity differently, not as a young species with limited resources, not as primitive beings with outdated technology, but as dangerously creative survivors who would fight with rocks and sticks if necessary, and somehow find a way to win. 3 months after the battle, Jake sat in his office reviewing supply requisitions. The work never stopped. Equipment still broke. People still needed things. Life continued in its familiar patterns. But everything was different now. New Haven was no longer forgotten. It was no longer weak. It was a symbol. Lisa knocked on his door. The new water recyclers are online. No more contamination problems. That is almost disappointing. We might need that contaminated water again someday. She laughed. Let us hope we never do. Once was enough. Danny entered behind her. Captain Morrison, the new defense platforms are operational. We have full coverage of the orbital space. Nothing will surprise us again. Good. But Danny, remember that weapons are only part of defense. The real strength is knowing when to use them and how. I learned that from you, sir. Jake looked at his team. These people who had faced impossible odds and found an impossible solution. They had not won because they were strong or well-equipped. They had won because they were human, and humans did not surrender easily. New Haven continued to grow and prosper. Children played in streets that had almost been bombed. Farmers planted crops in soil that had almost been poisoned. Families built futures that had almost been erased. And in the town square, a mining hauler stood as a reminder that survival sometimes required creativity and desperation and a willingness to fight with whatever was available. The legend of New Haven spread through human space and beyond. It became a story that parents told their children. A lesson that military academies taught their students. A warning that enemies whispered to each other. Never underestimate humanity. Never assume they are helpless. Because when humans are cornered, they will turn the entire universe into a weapon if that is what survival requires. And that was the real lesson. Not that New Haven won, but that they refused to lose.